Scott stood by the large floor-to-ceiling window, arms crossed, a cup of black coffee in his hand. The city below pulsed with its usual chaos, honking horns, rushing footsteps, lives colliding and moving on. But in his apartment, everything felt still. Elena had gone quiet since the article broke. Not upset, just quiet, thoughtful. She had spent more time painting, more time lost in her own world, and while Scott tried to respect that, something inside him started to worry. That morning, she hadn't come out for breakfast. Cairo was playing on the rug, babbling happily with his plush lion toy, while Scott watched the hallway waiting for her. The seconds stretched, and finally, he walked to the studio door and knocked gently. "Elena?" he called softly. There was a pause, then her voice, low but calm. "Come in." He opened the door and found her sitting on the floor, paint smudged on her cheek, her canvas streaked in reds and deep blues. Her eyes looked puffy, like she'd been crying, but not in a way that asked for pity. It was the kind of cry you have when the weight becomes too heavy to pretend anymore. "I didn't want to bother you," she said without looking up. "You never could," he said gently, stepping inside. "Is everything okay?" She nodded, then shook her head. "I don't know, everything's so perfect now, it scares me." Scott sat beside her. "Because you think it won't last?" She wiped her hands on a rag, breathing out slowly. "Because it never has." That hit hard, and deeper still because it was true. "You know the hardest part?" she asked, voice cracking. "It's not surviving. It's allowing myself to believe that maybe I don't have to anymore, that someone might actually stay." Scott reached for her hand, gently brushing his thumb over her fingers. "I'm staying. Not because I feel sorry for you, not because of guilt. I'm here because I want to be, because I should have been all along." "But what if you change your mind?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, it was scared. "What if one day you wake up and this feels like a burden?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he got up, walked to the bookshelf in the living room, and pulled out an old shoebox. Dusty, worn, one of the few things he'd kept from his teenage years. He came back, sat down, and handed it to her. "Open it." Elena blinked, then slowly lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of old photographs, faded notes and sketches from their childhood in Nigeria, pictures of them laughing on rooftops, small letters she had once slipped into his backpack. During school days, tiny art pieces she had made with bottle caps and chalk. "I kept all of it," he said. "Even when I left, even when I became Scott Williams, CEO of everything. This was the only part of me that stayed real." Her hand trembled as she picked up a photograph. Her younger self, barefoot in a yard, laughing at something Scott had said. "I can't believe you still have this." "Of course I do," he said. "You weren't just part of my past, you're part of everything I became." She covered her mouth, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "I wanted so badly to forget. I hated you for not coming back. I told myself you were just another man who left." "I was," he admitted. "But I'm not anymore." The words hung between them like a fragile thread. Then Cairo toddled into the room, dragging his lion toy, wobbling toward Elena and collapsing into her lap. She scooped him up, burying her face in his little curls. "He deserves better than our mistakes," she said. Scott leaned forward and kissed Cairo's head. "Then let's give him better. Together." A few moments passed. Then she looked up, eyes shining through the tears, and said, "I believe you, Scott. For the first time in years, I actually believe someone means it." He smiled softly. "That's all I've ever wanted." But just as the moment settled, the doorbell rang. Scott's brows furrowed. "I wasn't expecting anyone." Elena froze. "Do you think—" He stood up quickly and walked to the door, checking the camera feed. His body stiffened. Outside stood a man, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, sharp jawline, wearing a thin jacket, holding an envelope in one hand and a photograph in the other. Scott turned slowly toward Elena. "You know him?" he asked. She stood behind him now, holding Cairo. Her face went pale. That's Cairo's biological father." Scott's heart dropped, and just like that, peace threatened to shatter. The air in the apartment shifted, suddenly heavy, like it was holding its breath. Scott's hand rested on the door handle, but he didn't open it. He turned toward Elena again. Cairo stirred in her arms, sensing her tension. Her knuckles had gone white where they gripped the baby. "Do you want me to send him away?" Scott asked, voice low but firm. Elena hesitated, her lips parted, but the words didn't come immediately. Then she said, "No. If he's come this far, I need to know why." Scott nodded once, then pulled the door open. The man standing there didn't look like trouble, not at first glance. But there was something in his eyes, a restlessness, a calculation. He looked at Scott, then past him, and when his gaze found Elena, it changed, softened, or maybe sharpened. It was hard to tell. "Elena," he said. She stepped forward, holding Cairo tighter. "What are you doing here, David?" David looked down at the photo in his hand. It was a worn picture of Elena holding a newborn Cairo, clearly taken without her knowledge. "I had to see him. I know I don't have the right, not after everything, but I've changed." Scott's jaw tensed. "Changed into what? A stalker?" David's eyes flicked toward him, cool and unreadable. "You must be the billionaire." "Yeah," Scott replied coldly. "And you must be the coward who walked away." Elena stepped between them. "Stop it, both of you." David looked pained. "I didn't come to fight. I came because I made a mistake, a huge one. I left when I should have stayed. I ran when things got hard. But I've been sober for over a year now. I got a job, I got a place. I've been trying to fix my life." Scott's voice was like steel. "And now you want to fix her life too?" "No," David said quietly. I want to know my son." Elena didn't say anything for a long time. The silence was deafening. Cairo babbled softly, oblivious to the storm swirling around him. Finally, she asked, "Why now?" David took a deep breath. "Because I saw that article. I saw how strong you are. I saw Cairo's face, and something inside me just broke. I knew I couldn't ignore him anymore." Scott felt the heat rising in his chest, the rage, the protectiveness, but Eleanor raised a hand, stopping him. "Let's talk," she said. They sat in the living room, David on one side, Scott on the other, like two guards at war. Eleanor sat in the middle, Cairo in her lap, the baby watching each man like he sensed the unspoken tension. David leaned forward. "I'm not here to take him away. I swear. I want to be part of his life. Even if it's just small. I visit now and then. Maybe when he's older, I'll do anything. Just please don't shut me out." Scott's hands were clenched, but he didn't speak. He let Elena lead. "I'm not saying no," she said slowly. "But I'm not saying yes either. You left me when I needed you most. And now you want to show up because my son is suddenly connected to a billionaire? That's a little too convenient." David's eyes flashed with something close to shame. "That's not why. I didn't even know about him until months after you gave birth. I didn't know where you were. I didn't have the courage to look." Scott finally spoke. "And what do you want now? Joint custody? Photos for your Facebook? What exactly is your plan here?" David looked at him, calm but tired. "I don't want anything from you, but he's my son too. No amount of money changes that." Elena stood. "That's enough." She walked to the window, looking out at the city, holding Cairo like a shield. "I need time," she said without turning around. "This isn't just about blood or regret or guilt. This is about what's right for my son. And right now, what he needs is stability." David stood, slipping the envelope onto the table. "My contact information, in case you decide." He walked to the door. Just before stepping out, he turned to Scott. "I don't know what you've got with her, but don't assume I'm the only one with regrets." Then he was gone. The door clicked shut behind him, and for a while no one moved. The only sound in the room was Cairo's quiet breathing against his mother's chest. Scott finally spoke, his voice low. "Are you okay?" Eleanor turned to him, eyes glassy but strong. "No, but I will be." He stepped closer. "Whatever you need, space, time, anything, I'll give it." She nodded. "Thank you." Then, in the quietest voice, she asked, You won't leave, right? Not because it's messy now. Scott met her eyes, full of everything he never said out loud. I didn't stay through peace just to leave during war. She walked toward him slowly. Cairo stirred, letting out a small yawn. She rested her head on Scott's chest, and for a moment it felt like the storm had passed. But Scott knew better. Storms don't just pass. They circle back. And somewhere in New York, Cairo's biological father had walked back into the world with new intentions, unknown motives, and a quiet hunger to reclaim what he lost. And this time, Scott would have to fight not just for love, but for his family. Scott barely slept that night. Elena was curled up in the guest bed with Cairo, the baby pressed into her chest like a heartbeat she couldn't let go of. Scott stood in the hallway outside, leaning against the wall, staring at the closed door like it held all the answers he didn't know how to ask. David, that name was going to be a problem, not because Scott was jealous, he could admit he was, but because of what David represented. Chaos, failure, the past returning when it had no business showing up. He poured himself a glass of water in the kitchen, but his hands were shaking. He wasn't used to feeling this out of control. He could negotiate billion-dollar mergers, silence lawsuits, even manipulate media narratives, but this was different. This wasn't strategy. This was Eleanor. This was his son. His son. The words felt strange every time he said them, even in his head. He had missed Cairo's first word, his first steps, his first laugh. And now some other man who didn't deserve to be called father had the nerve to show up, claiming he wanted to be part of the boy's life. Scott knew enough about broken men who returned out of guilt. He'd met too many of them in boardrooms, apologies stuffed in expensive suits pretending to have found redemption. David looked like one of those. But Eleanor? Eleanor wasn't as cold. She was stronger than Scott remembered, softer too, but she still had that part of her that wanted to believe in people, even the ones who didn't deserve it. And Scott couldn't shake the fear that she'd let David in. Not into her heart, maybe, but into Cairo's life. The next morning she found Scott already dressed, suit jacket folded over the back of a chair, coffee untouched. "You didn't sleep," she said, almost like a fact. He shook his head. "Didn't feel like I could." She walked past him, opened the curtains, and let in a weak morning sun. "You're angry." "I'm protective," he corrected. "There's a difference." She turned to face him, arms crossed. "David showing up doesn't erase what you've done for us. You don't need to be threatened." Scott stepped closer. "I'm not threatened by him. I'm threatened by what happens if you give him space." "He's Cairo's biological father," she said carefully. "That's not something I can erase. And I'm the one who's been here, the one who stepped in when you were cold and scared and barely surviving." Her voice dropped. "I know that." "Do you?" he asked. "Yes," she snapped suddenly, surprising them both. "Scott, don't make me choose between being grateful and being a mother. I didn't ask for David to show up. I didn't even want him here. But I can't erase him either. And you," she paused, eyes narrowing, "you don't get to turn this into a fight over territory. Cairo is not a battleground." The room fell quiet. Scott looked down. "I'm sorry. I hate the idea of him around." "Me too," she whispered, "but we can't afford to ignore reality." Later that day, things took a darker turn. Scott's assistant called again. "Sir," James said, voice tight, "we have a situation." Scott stepped into his office, closing the door behind him. "What now?" "David." He spoke to a reporter. Scott froze. "He what?" "Someone from the Post. I don't know what was said, but they've got pictures. Him outside your residence. A shot of Cairo, possibly Eleanor, though it's blurry." Scott felt rage rise like acid in his throat. He said he didn't want drama. Looks like he changed his mind. An hour later, Scott was in a meeting with his legal team. By noon, he had hired private investigators. By 3 p.m., his security team had been briefed to keep eyes on Elena and Cairo around the clock. When he returned home that evening, Elena was in the living room feeding Cairo mashed banana. She looked up at him, and her eyes widened instantly. "What happened?" Scott didn't try to soften it. David's talking to the press. Her hand paused midair. Cairo reached for the spoon, but she didn't move. He said he wouldn't, she whispered. He lied. She leaned back on the couch, eyes glazing over. So it begins. Scott sat beside her. No, I'll handle it. Scott. She looked at him now, more serious than ever. Don't make this worse. Please, don't bury him the way billionaires bury threats. I know you can destroy him, but he's trying to use Cairo. Use you. Use us. And what will we become? If we respond like him, she asked. If we let this get dirty? He didn't answer, not because he didn't have words, but because for the first time her restraint felt stronger than his power. Scott knew how to win wars, but this wasn't a war anymore. It was a test of who they would become next. Elena stood, lifted Cairo into her arms, and said softly, "Please, don't forget who you are, who we are. Don't let him turn this into something ugly." Scott watched her walk away, the baby curled peacefully on her shoulder. He sat back, hands folded, heart pounding. David wanted a fight, but maybe, for once, Scott Williams needed to choose something harder than revenge. He needed to choose restraint. The article hit the internet the next morning, just as the sun was beginning to spill across the skyline. The headline read, "Forgotten Father or Billionaire's Scandal." The man behind Scott Williams's secret family speaks out. It wasn't just clickbait. It was poison wrapped in curiosity. Photos of David standing outside Scott's building. A blurry image of Cairo in a swing. A shadowed shot of Elena crossing the street with groceries. The article painted David as a redeemed father, a man seeking connection with his son after battling addiction. There were no threats, no claims of custody, just a quiet plea for recognition. It was strategic, too strategic. Scott stared at the screen in his office, fists clenched on the mahogany desk. His PR team was already scrambling. The article hadn't named Cairo outright, but the implications were clear. And the damage had begun. Blogs picked it up. Comment sections exploded. Another rich man hiding his mistakes. Why do they always come back when it's too late? Respect to the dad trying to do the right thing. Where's the mother in all this? And that was what pushed Scott over the edge, because now Elena was being pulled into the narrative, and she didn't deserve that. Not after surviving everything she had, not after scraping her way through the darkness without anyone lifting her up. Now strangers behind phone screens were judging her, dissecting her choices like they understood. He stormed out of his office and went home early. When he entered the apartment, the lights were dim. Elena sat at the dining table, her phone beside. Her Cairo asleep in his bassinet nearby. She didn't look up. "You saw it?" he asked. She nodded slowly. Her voice was quiet. "People are saying I trapped you, that I used Cairo to get your money." Scott's jaw tightened. "They don't know a damn thing." "No, they don't," she said, finally meeting his eyes. "But they're saying it anyway." He walked to her and knelt beside the chair, gently resting a hand on her knee. "We'll get through this." Elena's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. "I'm not ashamed of my life. I'm not ashamed of my son. But I'm so tired, Scott. I just wanted to live. Not defend myself every damn day." "I know," he whispered, "and I'll fix it." She looked at him hard. "Don't fix it like a billionaire. Fix it like a man." He nodded, then kissed her hand. "I promise." That night, while Elena rocked Cairo to sleep, Scott made one final call, not to his lawyers, not to the press, to David. David answered after the second ring. "Didn't expect to hear from you. You wanted attention, you got it," Scott said coldly. "Now here's what's going to happen." "Oh? You going to threaten me, Mr. CEO?" "No," Scott said. "I'm going to offer you a deal. There." Was silence. "Go on," David said warily. "You disappear, for good. You want to write an apology, go ahead. But you will not show up unannounced again. You will not speak to the press again. You will not approach my son again without permission. I'll pay off your debts, set up a trust. Enough to start a life, but far away from here." David chuckled. "And if I say no, you won't. Because I know who you owe, I know who you've borrowed from, I know what's waiting for you in Queens. You won't survive another 6 months, David. But this buys you time. And a clean break. Another pause. Longer. Then David's voice came back, bitter and slow. "You think you win?" "No," Scott said. "I think my son wins, and that's the only thing I care about." David hung up. Scott sat back, breathing hard. He didn't feel powerful. He didn't feel like a victor. He felt relieved. 2 days later, a new article dropped. David's retraction. He called his actions regretful, said he didn't want to interfere with a child's peace. No further interviews were granted, and just like that, the storm began to quiet. That evening, Scott came home to find Elena on the balcony, a brush in one hand, a small canvas in the other. She was painting, again, deep ocean colors, soft sunlight on rooftops. "You silenced him, didn't you?" she asked without turning. "I offered him a way out," Scott replied, "and he took it." She sighed, placing the brush down. "Do I want to know the price?" "No," he said honestly. "But it wasn't blood, and that's progress, right?" She smiled faintly. "Progress?" Cairo babbled from the rug inside, playing with a stack of colored blocks. Scott walked over, scooped him up, and held him close. "I made a choice," Scott said. "I chose us, not just to protect you, but to stand beside you." Eleanor walked over, brushing a curl from Cairo's forehead. "So what now?" "We live," Scott said. "For real this time. No hiding." "No hiding." "And no boardrooms before breakfast?" she teased. He grinned. "Maybe just emails." They laughed quietly, and it felt different than before. Not like pretending, not like hoping, like being. For the first time in a long time, there were no threats at the door. No fears chasing them down alleys. No silence too loud to ignore. There was just a man, a woman, and a child, and something that felt like a beginning. Spring arrived in New York, quietly. The city didn't pause for it. Nothing ever truly stopped in Manhattan, but Elena noticed it in the small things. The ice on the sidewalks was gone. The air carried a faint warmth. The morning light didn't feel so cruel anymore. Inside the apartment, things were beginning to change too. Cairo had started walking properly, wobbling around like a tiny, determined explorer. Elena's paintings were drying faster now, each canvas brighter, louder, less shadowed by the past. And Scott was learning how to be present in ways that scared even him. He had started canceling meetings, delegating power, turning his phone off for hours at a time. One morning he stood by the window, Cairo balanced on his hip, watching the sunrise like it was a miracle he'd forgotten existed. Elena walked in, barefoot, robe wrapped loosely around her. She leaned on the doorway, smiling softly. "You know you look ridiculous holding a baby in a $1,000 suit, right?" Scott grinned. "Cairo disagrees, he just puked on my jacket." She laughed, a real one. It echoed through the apartment, warm and familiar. Scott stared at her like it was the first time he'd heard her laugh without pain stitched beneath. "I want to talk to you about something," she said gently. "Should I sit down?" he asked. "Maybe." They moved to the living room. Cairo waddled off toward his blocks, mumbling toddler nonsense to himself. Elena sat on the couch, legs tucked under her. She didn't look nervous, just thoughtful. "I've been offered a gallery spot." Scott blinked. "A what?" "In Brooklyn. Small place. Local artists. They found my blog after the article. One of my older pieces. The one with the market. Woman and the boy with the umbrella went kind of viral." Scott's eyes lit up. "That's amazing." "It is," she said. "But I want to be clear. I didn't ask for this because of your name or Cairo or any of this. They liked the art, just the art." "You don't owe me an explanation," Scott said quietly. She paused. "But I needed to say it." He nodded. "So what happens now?" "I want to take it," she said. "But I also want to start working slowly, part-time, maybe art classes, maybe even open a studio someday." Scott felt pride swell in his chest, but he didn't interrupt. "I've spent so long just surviving, Scott," she continued. "And now that I can breathe, I want to live. Not just through you, not just as a mother, as me." He reached over and took her hand. "Whatever you need, I'll support it. I'm proud of you." She squeezed his hand. "Thank you." Then her eyes softened. "But I have to ask you something hard." He nodded slowly. "Go on." "If this all disappeared, If the money vanished, if the suits and the meetings and the penthouse were gone, would you still be here? With me? The question didn't come from suspicion. It came from a place of fear, the kind of fear that never fully leaves someone who's been abandoned once. Scott didn't answer right away. Instead, he got up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out an old cardboard box. Elena recognized it immediately. His shoebox of memories. He brought it over, sat down beside her, and opened it. "This is who I was before the money," he said. "Before the empire." She looked inside. Old sketches, pictures, receipts from roadside vendors in Lagos, a dried flower pressed between pages of a notebook. "I kept these because they reminded me of who I was when I had nothing. And who loved me anyway." He looked at her. "If I lost everything tomorrow, the only thing I'd be afraid of losing is this. You. Him." Elena didn't say anything. She leaned forward and kissed him. Soft, not desperate, not hungry. Just real. Cairo clapped his hands from across the room, grinning without knowing why. That evening they walked to the park again. No bodyguards, no headlines, just them. Cairo giggled on the swing. Scott pushed gently. Helena sat on the bench nearby, watching them like a woman seeing a dream unfold in real time. Another mother nearby looked over and smiled. "He's adorable," Elena smiled. "He gets it from his father." Scott looked back and grinned. Finally, getting credit. The woman laughed and walked off with her toddler. Elena stood and joined him. They stood side by side, watching Cairo squeal as the swing carried him gently forward. "I was thinking," she said. "Dangerous," he teased. She elbowed him lightly. "I want to go back, to Nigeria, just for a bit." Scott turned to her. Surprised. "Lagos," she nodded. "I want to show Cairo where he comes from. I want to stand in the street where we met. I want to paint it. And maybe I want to bury a few ghosts." Scott's eyes softened. "Then we'll go." "Are you sure?" "I left once and didn't look back. I think it's time I finally did." They stood there, watching their son fly gently back and forth. The city humming around them, but distant, like it didn't matter anymore. And in that moment, Scott realized he hadn't just found Elena again. He'd found himself. Not the millionaire, not the CEO, just the boy from Mushin, who had finally come home. The plane touched down in Lagos just after midnight. The heat was different from New York's. It wrapped around the skin like a memory, thick, warm, alive. As they stepped off the private jet, the humid air met them, like an old friend Scott had once ignored. Elena stepped down first, Cairo on her hip, eyes wide and alert despite the late hour. Scott followed close behind, his tailored shirt already clinging to his back. He hadn't been home in over 20 years. Lagos hadn't waited for him. The city pulsed and groaned, louder than he remembered, faster too, but the bones were the same. The streetlights flickered just like they had in his childhood. The dust still clung to the corners of buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a generator, rattled, constant, dependable, like the heartbeat of the country. A car waited for them, modest, local. Scott had refused anything flashy. No limousines, no tinted bulletproof SUVs. Just space for 3 people trying to remember who they were before life complicated them. The ride through the city was mostly silent. Elena stared out the window, one hand on Cairo's leg, humming a soft Yoruba lullaby. Scott watched the streets roll by, the crowded kiosks, the motorbikes weaving through traffic, the echoes of his youth in every shout and honk. He leaned toward her. "Do you still remember the fish market?" She nodded without looking at him. "Where we used to hide behind the blue barrels and steal chin-chin from the vendor." Scott laughed quietly. He knew. He just pretended not to see. She smiled, faintly. Maybe he thought you needed it more than he did. They stayed in a modest apartment Scott had rented in Ikoyi, not too far from where he grew up, but not too close either. The building was quiet, the rooms simple. Eleanor stood in the living room that first night, looking around like she was seeing her old life in reverse. "It's strange," she whispered. "What is?" "To come back and not feel pain right away, just stillness." Scott unpacked quietly. "We're not here to be haunted. We're here to heal. The next morning they visited Mushin, the neighborhood where it all began. The streets were narrower than Scott remembered. The buildings older, but the smells, the sounds, the people, they hadn't changed. Children ran barefoot in the dust. Women balanced baskets on their heads with quiet grace. An old man selling a kara under the same faded umbrella nodded as they passed. Elena held Cairo close, but her eyes were wide, full of color, full of something she hadn't felt in years. "Let's walk," she said. They passed the old corner store where Scott used to buy sweets with pocket change. The mural Elena once painted, long faded, was still faintly visible on the wall near. The school. It showed a boy standing on a rooftop reaching for the stars. Scott stopped in front of it, silent. "You remember what you told me the night you left?" Elena asked. He nodded. "One day I'll come back with enough light to paint your stars for real." "And then you never came." "I wanted to," he said, eyes fixed on the faded paint. "But I was scared. Scared I'd come back and nothing would have changed, or worse that I had." Elena reached out, her fingers brushing against the old wall. "Maybe it changed us instead." Later, they visited her mother's old house, now empty, its door half rotted. Helena stood at the threshold and said nothing for a long time. "I used to dream of running away from here," she finally whispered. "Now I dream of preserving it." Scott looked at her. "Then let's do it." She turned to him. "Do what?" "Buy it, fix it, turn it into something, an art center, a home for single mothers, a school, something that gives back what this place took." Her eyes welled. "You mean it?" "I mean everything now," he said. That night, as they sat on a rooftop, yes, the rooftop, the three of them looked up at the Lagos sky. Stars blinked through, the haze. Cairo lay between them, gurgling happily, reaching for Scott's tie. "You think he'll remember any of this?" Scott asked. Elena smiled. "No, but we will." Silence stretched between them, comfortable now, not filled with fear or history, just space to breathe. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said after a while. "Anything. If you hadn't seen me that day in Manhattan, do you think we would have ever found each other again?" Scott didn't answer right away. He looked at Cairo, at her, at the city he used to run from and now felt tethered to. "No," he said honestly. "I don't think I would have searched. I was too buried in noise, in ambition. But maybe the world has a way of making us stop at the right red light." She chuckled softly. "Fate? Or guilt with good timing?" She laughed again, fuller now, the kind of laugh that only comes when pain has loosened its grip. And as they sat under that African sky, on that rooftop that once held their teenage dreams, it became clear. This wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the start of a legacy. 2 months later, the house in Mushin stood reborn. The rusted roof had been replaced with bright terracotta tiles. The cracked walls were painted over with soft cream, and the old mango tree in the yard, once Elena's hiding place from the world, now shaded a brand new swing set. Children's laughter echoed through the gate every afternoon. They had named it the Cairo Center. It wasn't just a building, it was a symbol, a home for mothers with nowhere to go, a free daycare, a tiny studio where Elena taught art once a week, a small library filled with donated books. And outside, painted across the front wall in bold, rich colors, was a mural Elena had worked on every day for 3 weeks, a mother holding a child under a starlit sky, and behind them, a shadow of a younger version of herself holding hands with a boy who looked suspiciously like Scott, both staring at the moon with wide, impossible hope. When she stepped back from it on the final day, brush in hand, Cairo toddling beside her with red paint on his fingers, she whispered, "I finally finished the dream." Scott stood nearby, sunglasses pushed up on his head, watching her. "It's not just finished, Elena, it's living." They were no longer hiding in penthouses or ducking tabloids. The world had moved on. The headlines were gone. David had disappeared quietly into another city, another life. Whatever bitterness he carried, he kept it far from them. Scott had followed up once, sent a lawyer to confirm the trust was untouched. David hadn't spent a cent. That chapter had closed, but others had opened. Elena's art now hung in two galleries, one in Brooklyn, another in Lagos. She didn't care about fame, but people cared about her. Her style was raw, loud, emotional. Women cried in front of her canvases. And that was enough. Scott, too, had changed. He still ran his empire, but from a distance now. His boardroom schedule now included Park with Cairo and Paint Day with Elena. He bought less, spent less, and gave more. And most of all, he listened to his son's quiet babble, to Elena's silences, to the things he used to drown with noise. On a breezy Sunday, they stood together in the backyard of the Cairo Center. A small group had gathered, local mothers, neighbors, volunteers. Eleanor was holding Cairo, who was busy trying to eat a biscuit bigger than his face. Scott had his arm around her waist, his other hand full of rice from a paper plate someone had forced on him. One of the local kids ran up and tugged at Scott's leg. "Mr. Scott, can I ride your shoulders?" Scott laughed and bent down. "Only if you don't mind if I scream in pain the whole time." Elena chuckled as the boy climbed up, shouting with joy. "You're soft now." Soft. Scott raised a brow. "This is fatherhood. Respect the transformation." That night, they returned to their rented flat. Nothing fancy, just a clean space with soft sheets and a window that overlooked the street where they first kissed as kids. After Cairo had fallen asleep, Eleanor sat on the floor, back against the couch, holding a sketch pad. Scott sat beside her, shirt unbuttoned, feet bare. "You look tired," she said. He nodded. "But it's the good kind. Like my soul did something worth feeling." She leaned against his shoulder. "I want to stay." "In Lagos?" "Not forever. But longer. Long enough to build something real, not just for us, for people like us. For the version of me that used to cry on church steps. For the girl who thought no one would come back." Scott nodded slowly. "Then we'll stay." She looked up at him. "What about your empire?" He kissed her forehead. "It'll survive." "It was never the legacy anyway." She closed her eyes and whispered, "This is—" They fell asleep on that floor, with the night breeze slipping through the window and the hum of generators in the distance, and Cairo snoring faintly from the other room. And in the quiet of that Lagos night, one thing was finally clear. The boy who left to chase the world, the girl who stayed to survive it, the child they created in the shadow of pain, had found something far more powerful than wealth, power, or escape. They had found home, and it didn't need gold or glass or skyscrapers. It just needed love, real, flawed, unshakable love. The kind you fight for, the kind you grow into, the kind you come back for, forever.